Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us here for the UFC 282 preview show. My name is Karl Bainbridge, and I am joined by the man on the right-hand side of my screen. He is the Kirsty McCall to my Shane McGowan. It's Joe Neal. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Glad to be the Bobby Hill to your Joseph Gribble, or maybe the flip of that for the King of Hill fans out there.
Yep. And also as well, welcome to, I guess we can call this somewhat of a Christmas special. And I have to say, Joe, you've made more of an effort than I have.
I wish I could fit. I have a very large head, and I should have checked the size on this Santa Claus hat, because when I put it on in the car, it was like squeezing my head, and then with the headphones, it's just not happening. So I think I think I already have to retire it.
Yeah. I've made a slight effort though. I've got myself my Christmas mug there, my pot of tea, as per usual. And I have to say as well, thank you very much for tuning in to the show. Here on INC Live, we want to say thank you to all the support you've given us over the past 12 months. Joe, some of your contents, your post-fight reactions have been getting some of our best numbers of all time. So I want to say a big congratulations to yourself. And if you want to support the channel in any way you can do, all of our Twitter, Instagram, Patreon links are all up there at the top of your screen. If you want to support Joe in particular, Joe's got his own commitments outside of the channel. Where is the best place to find him, Joe?
Right now, I've been a little inconsistent lately because I've been having some like illnesses and been a little sick lately. I got hit with that flu that's going around, and I'm on Twitch TV / Loco Joe 39, and I stream. I do a bunch of other nerd stuff, but I'm also looking to kind of expand into MMA content. Maybe I'll rescore fights, you know.
Like rewatch some classic events. We've got plenty of anniversaries coming up in 2013.
Oh yeah, I think the first one I was thinking of doing was I thought about rewatching the duology of Frankie Edgar and Vincent Henderson since he just retired, and I thought, maybe I'll rescore those because I scored them for Frankie both the first time around. So I'm wondering how that holds up.
Definitely, it's definitely worth looking forward to. And another thing that's worth looking forward to is the show that we are here to preview, UFC 282, our final event of 2022 when it comes to pay-per-views. I think they have Sean Strickland versus Cannonier the week after, and that will be the last one of the year. Of course, Ryzen will do their own New Year's Eve show, which we're always looking forward to. INC will be trying to produce content as much as we can between now and the end of the year. We've got ourselves some fantastic videos, which hopefully will get some decent numbers. Joe, of course, has his own commitments. I have to say, though, Joe, when it comes to UFC 282, there's often been a tradition that the UFC, if they have any sort of loose cards that they can still play before the end of the year, they throw them all onto the December show. This time around, though, I don't know about you, 282 feels a little bit underwhelming compared to what we normally see in December.
Yeah, if I know, obviously, like the big story is the Yuri shoulder injury. So then Glover was like, "Oh, if I'm going to fight Ankalaev, that's a completely different matchup. I want a little bit of time." UFC said no, and they didn't want to give him Jan. So here we are. Um, and like obviously, like we're missing that main event. But even with that main event, I feel like this card was missing that one thing. That like one little thing. I mean, as much as I love seeing certain people on this card, their recent performance in tracks doesn't get me as excited as I would have been a couple years ago.
Yeah, because I was looking through some of the other recent December shows that we've had. Like, obviously, 269 was last year. We had the big Pena upset. Charles Oliveira legitimized himself as a top-level UFC lightweight champion. And even in the years before that, you had Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo, which is fantastic. Holloway, Brian Ortega, some fantastic December shows. And I think, as you mentioned before, there's some good names on this card. I think the prelims especially, very overlooked. But it's missing that something. We've got good fighters and a good card, but we need that X factor.
Yeah, it's sadly, I just kind of think I maybe have it here. It doesn't have that name value,
Yes.
which isn't the most important thing in the world. Name value does not equal to a card quality, but it is a little odd that Ankalaev's in the main event of the last pay-per-view of the year, and obviously it's because of circumstances, but still, it doesn't have any of that the casual clickbait, perhaps I guess would be kind of headlining this show that you would
There'll be
expect.
there'll be plenty of casual clickbait though. We'll talk about some of the things happening away from this event before we delve deeper into it, including what could be happening potentially at UFC 285. Now, the rumor from the UFC's perspective, they are planning for the heavyweight title, Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. Curtis Blades will be the backup if either of those two fail to make it to the March show. Does this fight happen?
No, it'll be Ngannou Curtis Blades. I think John Jones never fights again. That's my opinion, personally.
So, if you're...
But
and
it would be cool if it happened, though.
I am seeing a lot of people with that same sort of skepticism, especially when it comes to John Jones. He hasn't fought in 3 years. He's been teasing this idea of going up to heavyweight for the past 10 years. So we've heard all of these wolf whistles from John Jones for many, many years. So I understand why people are cynical. Why do you think the UFC are releasing this information, though? What are they trying to entice by saying this fight is definitely going to happen in March?
I think they're trying to force his hand right now. Like, he's been very much like, oh, the offer wasn't spectacular for the Stipe fight, kind of thing, which I don't know what that means. I think they're trying to, I think since he's trying to play a little harder and be a little difficult to work with to get a contract signed, I think they're now trying to force his hand here by going like, okay, fine, we'll give you the title shot, but if it doesn't happen, we got a plan. We don't need you. I think they're kind of showing that, like, some sort of that way, like in the sense of like we'll set it up. We'll go through your little pony show, but if you pull out, you're not hurting us as much as you think you are because we have Curtis Blades waiting. I think that's kind of the message they're sending to him.
And I have to say as well, like, if I was John Jones, and again, I'm putting myself in his shoes here. I don't know if this is the way he is actually thinking. But between the 3 people who've been rumoured to be fighting John Jones for like a good few months, I'd probably say Stipe was the one that he was angling for the most. Because Francis Ngannou, we all know about his godly power. John Jones is going to want any part of that. And Curtis Blades, I think, is going to give him a lot of problems when it comes to the wrestling. But Stipe Miocic, he has the perfect mix of name value, because in the UFC's eyes, he is like one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Personally, I still think Fedor's the best heavyweight ever, but that's an argument for another time. So you have that mix of name value, but also as well, we've got Stipe, who's 42 years old. Well, 40, I should say. Maybe a little bit past his prime. It's a winnable fight for John Jones compared to Curtis Blades and Francis Ngannou. So I think that was the fight that John was angling for.
I think so too. It's funny because I think all 3 of those guys beat him right now. I think Stipe would have done it, and I think Curtis Blades can do it, and I think Ngannou is definitely going to do it. But I mean, another thing too that I wonder about is I wonder about his commitment to fighting ever again at all. Really, I think you had the best theory where you said something along the lines of like, this is he doesn't have the legacy, he doesn't have the fan love because of he has the most failed drug tests in UFC history, and yet we still call him great, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if he loses, though, that's all gone. All he has is the fact that Matt Hamill's face is the only thing that's ever beaten him. If that happens, then what else? It's all gone in his mind potentially. So he might never fight to ever risk that. I think Dominic Reyes might have scared him for life on that one.
So it definitely remains to be seen whether or not John Jones actually does make this commitment to fight in March. One person who we won't be seeing around the octagon anytime soon, though, we're going to have to talk about this. It's the big story that's happening in the sport right now. James Krause and the betting scandal.
Fishy, fishy, fishy. I talked about it on the recap. The last recap for the Kutalaba Zichukwu card, and where like they were investigating it. And I thought the Derek Minor thing was very, very fishy. And then now, like the Megan Anderson not getting trained thing, that is a very good point. It's looking bad for that team and him. You know.
Yeah. So, for anybody who might be unfamiliar with the story, so James Krause has been suspended by the UFC, and it stems from accusations surrounding a fight involving Darek Minner, where it was reported that Minner was injured going into the fight. The betting odds changed substantially, so he was a massive underdog going into it, and almost immediately injured himself with the first kick he threw. Obviously, it ended with a first round stoppage. So, a lot of people are believing that James Krause, who coaches Darek Minner, gave this information away to people that he knew to put money on his opponent to win the fight. So, a lot of betting companies, especially in Canada, have now stopped taking bets on UFC events. James Krause has been suspended by the promotion. Darek Minner has been released. And the UFC have said that any fighter who is associated with James Krause's camp will not be booked until this situation has been cleared. So, we basically got ourselves a UFC version of Pete Rose.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. It's definitely just a Pete Rose thing. Chicago Black Sox as well. It's definitely really weird. The big one I worry about, like, I mean, this is a huge story, but them not letting people fight or, at all, if you're from his camp or train there, I wonder what's going to happen with the Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno fight, because Brandon Moreno changed gyms over there, and that title fight's coming up soon. What are we doing now? Like, it's very interesting.
And from Brandon's tweets as well, he seems to be very defensive of his coach. So there could be a big possibility of Brandon Moreno not fighting in January.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening. I think the UFC. I mean, obviously, in my opinion, you should be more focused about the integrity of the sport first and foremost, rather than business and matchmaking. That's just my opinion. Um, so obviously, getting this out now, taking this stand now is what's first and foremost important. In the next couple days, we're probably going to see news of Brandon Moreno ain't fighting. Here's Plan B, or whatever they can do.
I assume it'll be Pantoja.
That's the only thing I can think of. Which it's in Brazil, so double Brazilian main car or main event. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yep.
Pantoja Figueiredo sounds great too.
That's something that we can look forward to in January. Let's look at what we can look forward to in December. So we're going to start with the prelims. You can see those on our screen right now. And as I mentioned before, the main card has some solid names, but no sort of big casual star power going with it. And I feel the same way about the prelims as well. I think we've got some pretty solid names on the prelims. Now, the one fighter who's garnering the most attention, he's going to be the second from last fight on the prelims, which is, I don't know if this is Raul or Howell, but Raul Rosas Jr. Now, at 17 years old, he is going to be the youngest fighter in UFC history. He will break Dan Lauzon's record, which he's held since, I think, 2006. Taking on Jay Perrin, who's lost his first two fights in the UFC. And this is a big question which has been circulating around a lot of people in regards to this guy. Is Rosas being signed too early?
Maybe. I think we're gonna find out real quick. I kind of look at it this way though, because I heard people getting very upset over his signing. I've heard it being described as this is we're giving Raul Rosas, like, we're giving him a contract. Us giving him a contract doesn't mean we're not signing anyone else who could potentially be more worthy. If we don't sign him, that doesn't free up a contract for them. It's either he's getting signed or he's not. Kind of like defense of the UFC with it. So it's interesting to consider, but I think it's probably a little too early. So he could be, and I love this guy. It could be a Chase Hooper situation where everyone's going to be really critical of him, even though he is still super young in the sport and everything, and we're kind of watching him grow. Or it could be like a Charles Oliveira thing where Charles Oliveira came into the UFC, and I remember him saying he'd be the youngest champ ever, and that didn't happen until last year. So
I think my big issue is that the UFC likes framing itself as sort of like the elites fighting the elites. It doesn't have the structure in place, in my opinion, to sort of mold fighters and make them into elite starting from a young age. I mean, there are some exceptions. You mentioned Charles Oliveira there, which I think is a good one, but Charles suffered a lot of setbacks before he finally reached that sort of elite level. But most of the time, you get people like Paige Van Zandt, Sage Northcutt, Chase Hooper, and you sort of think to yourself, if these kids had spent more time on the regional scene to sort of build up their confidence, round out their skill set, and then enter around sort of 26, 27 years old, the perception of them and their development may have been a lot more clear cut.
for sure. I mean, I think the biggest critique I've heard, and that's a fantastic way of wording it, and it kind of leads into this is um, these guys like Sage Northcutt, Paige Van Zandt, they didn't have that kind of like they had the confidence that they were going to win fights, but there's a difference between that and having the experience to understand, to maintain that confidence when you have a struggle. You don't want to. And I'm not trying to pick on her, but like Carla Esparza has been criticized for if the fight isn't going her way, her mental game is kind of goes out the window. And you kind of in Sage Northcutt, I thought kind of suffered from that, and I thought Paige Van Zandt definitely did. Um, and that's something time on the regional scene and time kind of sharpening and sharpening those corners and everything, those edges, definitely could help out here. But who knows? I mean, we have a guy who's 5-1, 6-1 as middleweight champion of the world now. So who knows?
It's a winnable fight though for Rosas.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think not only does he win, I think he could be very impressive in it, and it could kind of clear some doubts people have, despite the fact that we still wouldn't know. We're still not going to know until he sees trouble.
Let's talk about some of the other fights happening on the prelims. Now, this one's going really under the radar. Edmund Shabazian back in action. So he's on a 3-fight losing streak, admittedly fighting some very top opponents. So it's Marvov, Jack Manson, and Derek Brunson. So no shame in losing to those three. He's relocated to a new training camp, which I think will be a relief to a lot of people, because I know that Edmund Tarverdian isn't the most popular person in the MMA circles. This is a must-win for him.
Absolutely. This is a loser league town for both fighters. I'm not gonna. I'm afraid of butchering the last name, but
just
his
call
opponent.
him Dalcha.
Perfect, Dalcha. So Dalcha, he's on a 3-fight losing streak as well in the UFC. So this is a loser league town situation. I did not know Shabazian changed camps. That makes me very, very excited and very curious. Because I in my notes here, I had said I think he could, whatever happens with the fight, a fight camp change is going to have to happen, I think, personally.
Yeah, I think he's gone to a more wrestling-centric gym.
Fantastic, then.
Yeah.
It's I think it's crazy to think that he went from like this dark horse killer in the division, just smoking everybody. I mean, I thought the Brad Tavares knockout was incredibly impressive. I think Brad Tavares is historically very underrated. I think he's always a solid name on a resume when you're coming up, and he had all this hype, and now he's, fighting to keep his job. It's such a crazy sport, things can change like that.
Yep. Other names which have taken my interest. Now, I'm surprised to see this one buried on Fight Pass. Billy Q versus Alex Hernandez. That sounds like a belter.
Yeah. Sounds great. It's a featherweight debut for Alex Hernandez, at least in the UFC from what I was looking. But because I remember seeing that going, oh, that's a typo. Quarantillo fights at featherweight. Hernandez is a lightweight. He's a big, wide lightweight. I always think of him as having these wide shoulders. And no, it's at featherweight. So I'm definitely really curious about that one as well, because I want to see what the cut is like for Alex Hernandez.
What else takes your interest on the prelims?
Chris Curtis and Joaquin Buckley is the one I saw and I got really excited for. I like Chris Curtis. I don't know him personally. He seems like he's an odd duck personality-wise, but I think he's really fun in the ring. I think he's really fun fighting. His last fight he lost, he was very frustrated because he kind of just got outsmarted and out game planned, and deservingly so lost by Jack Hermanson. But I think here, Joaquin Buckley and him, two action guys, two big finishers with a lot of power, and I still think they have upside, like a lot of upside, despite some of their struggles in the UFC. I'm really excited for this one. I think this could be a really good one.
I had a feeling you were going to pick that one.
Yeah, it just sound big fan of the southpaw boxing of Chris Curtis. So I want to see that.
Yeah. I've got that circled down as a potential fight of the night candidate personally. It remains to be seen whether or not they deliver on it. As mentioned before, I think we've got some very underrated prelims there. Let's kick off the main card though. Now, for a lot of people who are sort of real diehards of the sport, like watch like the Contenders series and watch every single random Eastern European promotion going, those sort of people are telling me this is a must watch. Bryce Mitchell taking on Ilia Topuria. So it's number 9 taking on number 14 in the featherweight division. Topuria, a minus 150 favourite going into this. Bryce Mitchell you can get at plus 130. And the big story regarding this one, Bryce Mitchell 15-0, Ilia Topuria 12-0. So, two unbeaten fighters coming up against one another. You'd seldom see that at this stage of each fighter's career.
Oh yeah, and I think the implications of who wins, you're not just taking someone's O away. I think the winner of this, I think they put themselves in a great spot because they're both in their 20s to potentially be a contender by the end of next year, if not earlier. This is a very interesting fight, and I love that we're opening up with it on the main card because this is probably my favorite fight on the whole card.
Because you think as well, with Alex Volkanovski being so dominant at featherweight, after you get past Yair Rodriguez, Josh Emmett, potentially Arnold Allen, you're going to be starting to get to people like the Topurias and the Mitchells of the world as potential title challengers.
Yeah, it's really hard to clean a division out. Realistically speaking, unless you're playing a video game, you're never going to go clean a division out because that requires fighting 4 or 5 times a year and just title defenses. So these guys are on their way up. You know, Volkanovski's been dominant. He's beaten a ton of people, but these guys are on the way up, and they're definitely they're getting close to the point where they can start looking at that title shot and start taking, have to be taken super seriously for contention.
So let's start with Bryce Mitchell then. 15-0 record. He did lose on The Ultimate Fighter. I think that was a loss to Brad Katona, I believe. But of course, that wasn't a sanctioned fight, so it doesn't count on his record. He claimed a big win over Edson Barboza at UFC 272, which was probably the only interesting thing about that pay-per-view. And apart from Barboza, there's wins over Andre Feely, Charles Hauser, Matt Sales as well. The Sales win being interesting because Bryce Mitchell won that one with a twister, so he's the only second man to ever win a UFC fight via twister. 9 wins by stoppage, all by submission. I did find this description of Bryce Mitchell, which I think sums him up absolutely perfectly. Farm strength.
Oh yeah, he's got that farm boy strength for sure. That's that good old. I'm from the South as well. He's got that good old farm hand strength. He's not good. He's not the guy in the gym pumping every weight in there, but he's gonna throw way more bales of hay than anyone kind of guy.
And what would you say are the biggest strengths when it comes to Bryce Mitchell? Obviously, people frame his grappling as his big sort of modus operandi. What is it in particular about his grappling that makes it so revered?
He's got I think I really like his like American Jiu-Jitsu kind of stylings. And for people that aren't aware, like they typically kind of call these top game heavy Jiu-Jitsu specialists, like a Jake Shields is considered American Jiu-Jitsu, and Bryce Mitchell is kind of exemplifies that to me. He's wanting the guy. He's going to shoot takedowns. He's going to try and look for trips and clinches. He wants to get this fight to the floor any way he can and use his dominant position to try and snatch stuff up. But off his back, he's obviously pretty good because that's how he got the twister. He's a very dangerous grappler. I'm not sure if he's quite on that level of the floor is lava Damian Maia in his prime level, but He's very scary, and that is where he's going to beat you. But his striking is improved. He did knock down Barboza. I think there's some. I don't think it's as simple as he knocked down Barboza by outstriking him. I think there's a little bit more to it, but he did do it. He clearly has some oomph in his punches, showing improvements.
I think it's one of those situations where we often hear people talk about this, where if you have a striker versus wrestler sort of battle, the striker becomes so paranoid about being taken down, it leaves them open for big shots. So you think about Randleman versus Crow Cop, or Khabib dropping Conor in their big fight. That's the sort of knockdown I see it as with Barboza and Bryce Mitchell.
That's 100% what it was. It was also, if I remember correctly, I think it was in the third round, and that was after Bryce Mitchell had just been slamming, throwing, and just all over and wearing out Barboza, who is a big 145er. So the cardio was definitely there. He was also tired, as well as like having his hands lower to try and just stop any takedown. So there's a lot of it definitely isn't as simple as, oh, he knocked him down, he outstruck him. No, there's like you're saying, tons of factors in to it there.
We'll shift this towards Ilia Topuria. Now, he's a 12-0. His last win was on that fantastic London card where he beat Jai Herbert, which was a rare venture to lightweight. Thankfully, I don't think that he's going to be experimenting with lightweight anymore, because that was scary for him at times, because Jai Herbert came very close to finishing him in that first round. Now, even though Bryce Mitchell does have, in my opinion, the biggest win between himself and Ilia by beating Edson Barboza, I would argue Topuria has the better cumulative wins, because outside of Jai Herbert, Ryan Hall, Damon Jackson, and Yusuf Zalal. So those are three very good fighters.
Oh yeah, he's got the resume. It's there's the one, like you said right there, the one big win for Bryce Mitchell, but the resume of Topuria is very impressive. And I do think he will go back to 155. I think he'll go to 155 to take on a certain guy in our co-main event. But that's for another discussion for another time potentially.
Yes.
He's got to get revenge for that hand sanitizer.
What I'm hearing a lot of people saying in regards to Ilia, though, is Ilia is the bookmaker's favourite. And from what I'm seeing, I think most people are picking him to win this one. And the reason they're doing so is the Ryan Hall fight. Because they thought, hey, here's Ryan Hall, who's this like jiu-jitsu savant. And Topuria completely neutralized all of Hall's attacks, finished him in the first round. And people are thinking, hey, if he's able to do that to Ryan Hall, who's arguably a better grappler than Bryce Mitchell, he'll steamroll through him. It's not as cut and dry as people are painting it out to be, though.
I agree. I think the stylings are way different. Ryan Hall, whenever he is on the feet, he's just throwing long, lanky kicks on the outside. He's circling and looking for that right moment to dive on a leg. Whereas Bryce Mitchell, he's going to run at you at full speed, just meet you. And Topuria is going to run, or isn't run at you, but he'll move at you. So I think these guys are going to meet in the middle, which is a completely different setup than Topuria just stalking and looking for the best way of dealing with Ryan Hall. It's a much different clash in the middle, for sure, just in, basic stylings alone.
Yeah, I can see Bryce being very pressure heavy, which I think is going to be very interesting to see. 100% takedown defense from Ilia Topuria. So that's going to be very interesting to see if he's able to hold that up. Because what I'm a little bit concerned about when it comes to Bryce Mitchell, and it goes back to what we saw when he fought Brad Katona on Tough, because that was a fight he ended up losing. And part of the reason he lost it was that he tried to go very pressure heavy, and the body shots started coming in from Brad Katona, started wearing him down a little bit, and eventually the third round submission. Is Bryce Mitchell going to be able to have that same resolve if he starts taking some of those big body shots that Ilia Topuria is more than capable of doing? Because that was the way he beat Damon Jackson.
I think Topuria is going to beat him up like that, personally. Spoilers, I am picking him to win, but I think Topuria not only is probably just as powerful as anyone, like in terms of just pure power in the punches, Topuria is probably as powerful as Barboza and anyone else he's fought in. And he's probably now, at this point in the game, faster than anyone. Bryce Mitchell has fought, and I think that is just a big recipe for disaster. We've seen that he does love the body shots. It was a body shot setup, then going high that he knocked out Jai Herbert with. So I think there's a lot of signs in that striking, and we how great his wrestling is that that is definitely something that I think we could see against Bryce Mitchell.
And I know people are trying to frame this as sort of striker versus grappler. Ilia Topuria started his career with 7 straight submissions. He is capable on the ground.
Yeah, I heard he was a grappler. I started looking into him a little bit before the Hall fight, and then I was like, and everyone told me he was a grappler, and that's what he was known for. Then I saw the Damon Jackson fight, and then the Ryan Hall fight, and I went, "What are you guys talking about?" And then now I go, "Oh no, he can just do anything." I'm very high on Topuria personally.
Yeah, so I'm going to make the assumption that you're picking him to win this one.
Yeah, I have him winning by a 3rd round stoppage. I think Bryce Mitchell's very tough, but I think eventually it's going to wear him out.
I'm going to say the same. I'm going to pick Topuria to win this one. Whether it's the 3rd round or late in the 2nd, I'm going to go late in the 2nd.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's also a very, very viable one.
And it would be interesting to see whomever wins this fight, who the winner gets paired up with next. Bearing in mind, obviously, Volkanovski steamrolling through so many contenders at featherweight. Do you want to put him against somebody who could potentially derail a future title challenger further down the road? So it's going to be interesting to see with the sort of person that they give them. Maybe like a Calvin Kattar, someone of that ilk.
What about Giga? I just thought of that.
I think they're quite high on Giga.
He could definitely fight the winner.
I think they'll try and give Giga some kind of bounce back fight.
That's very true, actually. Unless they're not confident in these guys. But we'll see.
We will see. And we're going to be very interested to see what happens in fight number 2. Now, it's scheduled, and I want to stress scheduled because we know this guy has a tendency to pull out of fights. People have been joking that it's going to be Kelvin Gastelum who'll be taking on Dricus du Plessis. But Darren Till is scheduled to return at UFC 282, and he's going to be taking on Dricus du Plessis, the number 13 ranked middleweight. Betting odds for this one, interestingly, Dricus is the bookmaker's favourite, -140. You can get Till at +120. Now, it's 15 months since Darren Till last fought. He had a defeat up against Derek Brunson. And there are a lot of people wondering, where does Darren Till stand in his career at the moment? So he's had 3 fights so far as a middleweight. He beat Kelvin Gastelum on his middleweight debut. Since then, lost to Robert Whittaker, and then lost against Derek Brunson. The long injury layoff. He's changed training camps. He's fighting over in Sweden right now with All Stars. Where is this guy right now?
If he were to retire right now, I think we would look at him as a potential one of the bigger missed opportunities in terms of skill set and athleticism for a guy to reach the ceiling that he hit. That being said, he's still young. He can still turn this around for sure. And I think an in-shape, motivated, and healthy Till is a very scary fighter. Yeah, he lost to Robert Whittaker, but so does everybody ever, it feels like. So there's no shame in that. And that fight was actually close.
Very close.
Robert Whittaker didn't just... Yeah, Robert Whittaker didn't storm through him like he's done every other, contender. Obviously, that could be a stylings kind of thing. But, I think of what Whittaker said about Till is the level of technical striking that he's at and how many feints he throws and then how he kind of tricks you into doing what Till wants you to do. I think that's very scary, the fact that a seasoned veteran and striker like a Robert Whittaker is saying about a guy like Till. So I just think he has a hard time staying motivated. I think he likes to party a lot. And obviously he's had a lot of health issues with his with injuries and stuff. So I don't know.
Because I was doing some research for the preview show, and I went back and rewatched the Derek Brunson fight. Now, admittedly, I have a little bit of a gut on me, so I shouldn't be criticising people for being out of shape. But I saw how shredded this guy was as a welterweight. And then you see him compared as middleweight. There's a little bit of a punch on him. I thought maybe his conditioning could have been a little bit better going into that. And I share your same sentiment. Maybe the focus wasn't there. Hopefully, going to All
Mm.
Star it maybe is now.
Oh yeah, an all. I wonder what there is to do at All Stars besides train and try and tune out Hamzat talking about smashing. So like they're you got to probably train. I think that's probably a better option than having to hear that guy just talk about smashing people. So uh, I'm hoping this. I'm admittingly a Darren Till fan. I picked him to win against Tyron Woodley years ago, and but I'm still a fan of his. I think he's very charismatic, and I think he's very fun. Has a very very good story. As a fighter and a person. Um, so I'm rooting for him. I really hope this camp change lets us see, like, can we break that ceiling that he's kind of put there himself. I'm very curious and hopeful.
Because we do need to remember that Darren Till at one point was worthy of a lot of the hype. I mean, this guy at one point was what, 17-0 going into the
Yeah.
Tyron Woodley fight. He had a lot of fanfare behind him. What do you think in terms of what he did in cage were the big things that stood out for Darren Till? Why were people so high on him before the Tyron fight?
I think one theory I have is why people really were high on him is he reminds everybody of a certain Irish striker, and kind of hands low, kind of karate styling, so he'll have his hands low, and then his best weapon is the left straight counter strike as a southpaw. So I think people saw that comparison, and that's a really easy kind of connection to make, and that does excite people. People like counter strikers. People like one shot bang kind of fighters. But the thing that was difference between them is he had a very he was a counter striker, but his Muay Thai was very impressive, very technical, and so his him coming at you and throwing standing elbows to counter you as you step in on him. I think that was very impressive, and just Nicholas Dalby fight, I think, showing the toughness of surviving despite tearing your shoulder out of place and continuing through the round. I think that won him a ton of fans. And then, of course, the Cowboy fight, and that's when everyone kind of took real big notices when he smoked Cowboy in a round years back.
Just going back, the Irish fighter, that was Karl Pendred, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Karl Pendred, big fan of his. Welterweight guy. Yeah. It was I forget his name. The flyweight, the flyweight, not Neal Seary.
Paddy Houlihan.
Yes, I was like, I want to say Paddy, but I feel like I'm just like thinking of that because of him. Yeah, Paddy Houlihan. Yeah, it was him. You guys got me.
Let's talk about his opponent though, because this is a two-way story, as it were. Dricus du Plessis, 17-2, coming off a win over Brad Tavares. Tavares has sort of been known as sort of like the middleweight gatekeeper. You sort of beat him, you move on to the next level of middleweight contenders. And we often talk about boys on this show. Those sort of fighters who are a little bit cringy, a little bit embarrassing to admit you like, but you deep down you root for him. I think Dricus would have to be up there. I love this guy.
I think if he wins this, he's gonna start breaking out of that boy stable. But I definitely get. Yeah, he's like magnetic to watch for some reason. So I definitely get it, and I do like him too. I hate that I have two fighters I like fighting each other, but such is the game. Yeah, he's definitely pretty much right now. He's definitely boy material because you gotta defend the striking, you gotta defend that and that's part of having a boy. You have to be able to defend him.
I think it's what I'm fascinated by with him is the discrepancy between how good his kicking game is. Like, he fires off a lot of low kicks. He'll go to the body a couple of times, carries a lot of power. And yet, when it comes to striking, actually punching people, and he's wading forward, you know those sort of inflatable tube men that you find outside of like car showrooms, that sort of thing? That's how he strikes. He's a Bailey buddy.
Yeah, he's like, it's, if anyone hasn't seen it, by the way, look it up. Trust me. Like, it is very alarming the first time I saw it. because I first saw him fight in KSW, and I was like, what? That? And then he won. He beat one of my favorites and guys I'm very high on in Roberto Soldic. And I was like, oh, he knocked out Soldic with the hands.
The only
But
man to ever knock out Soldic.
yeah, I mean, it was, he caught him. He, clipped him good. And with those punches like that we are making fun of. So clearly they work for him. They're just a little awkward to watch and kind of humorous. But then again, I wouldn't want him hitting me with those. So
No, it's effective. That's the thing. It's
yeah,
sloppy. It doesn't look aesthetically pleasing, but it's effective.
yeah. It's not a pageant; it's a fight.
Exactly.
So.
And when it comes to Dricus as well, apart from the Soldic win, which I'd argue is the biggest one he's had, Marcus Perez, pretty solid name there. Trevin Giles, who I'm personally very high on, and then of course Brad Tavares. Some pretty solid names there. Definitely carrying a lot more momentum than Till is. 5-fight winning streak, 3-0 in the UFC. What was interesting to find out though is 7 KOs, 9 submissions. So if Till has been learning how to wrestle up at All Stars, it's going to be tested against Dricus because he's a capable grappler.
Oh, for sure. It's he's been getting his knockouts wins, but I've always heard that his grappling is where he's a little bit better at than striking. Like he's well rounded, of course, but no one's 100% 50-50. So it's I've always heard his grappling is where he has the edge in.
Yeah, I would say if we say like with Bryce Mitchell, he's more sort of like a technique orientated fighter when it comes to his grappling. I think Dricus is the opposite. Dricus is somebody who relies a lot on his power. So if you look at a lot of his submissions, very power-based stuff, it's Kimuras, it's stuff where you need a lot of torque and strength to actually put it all together. Like going back to his striking, I think one of the things I've noticed about Dricus, which would be interesting to see given Tills likes to rely on pressure a lot, is if you go back and you watch the Trevin Giles knockout, the way he got that was inviting, almost sort of pressing himself against the fence, and Trevin getting this sort of false sense of security and thinking, aha, I've got him now, I can tee off. And that's when he launches the counter shot and manages to knock him out. So it would be interesting to see if we see a similar strategy, where Darren Till tries to close the distance, come forward, and then comes to counter-strike, similar to what happened against Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, because he stepped in without the setup and gets clobbered. I think that's actually a really good breakdown there. I think there's a very strong possibility of that as well.
Yeah. In terms of Darren Till as well, you mentioned like the big left hand. It has worked for Darren Till in the past. It is his most potent weapon. One, does he need to sort of spread out his portfolio a little bit more? Try and develop more weapons outside of the big left hand? And two, how effective is this one-note strategy at the higher weight class? Because a lot of Darren Till's success, especially when it came to defense, was built around size. He was a good Muay Thai guy because he could smother people because he was so big. If someone tried to take him down, he was so big he could sprawl easy. A lot of the big weapons that Till had are no longer there as a middleweight.
Yeah, and that cut is just too much that he can't go back down, really. No. A strike I would love to see him add to his arsenal is a lead leg snap kick up the middle to kind of help. He doesn't like to jab. He's not a very big jabber, which I like seeing a good jab, so that kind of hurts my feelings a little bit. But I think a lead leg snap kick or even a rear leg snap kick, I think that's Conor McGregor's best strike. But, and I'm a Conor hater. That's his best strike, I think. And I think he had a ton of success with that. And I would love to see Till kind of take that, idea and kind of run with it as well. That's a weapon I would love to see him add. I think we'll see him kick a lot more in this fight, personally, if his knees are okay. If his knees are good, I think he's going to kick more because, Hamzat threw a good amount of kicks in his last fight, or not his last fight, because that was the Kevin Holland one, but in his Gilbert Burns fight, he threw a lot more kicks than I expected him to. So I wonder at All Stars if they're really pushing kicking and the striking as well.
You're going to have to put your money where your mouth is Who are you picking to win this one?
I'm gonna have the impression that Darren Till is motivated. He is in shape and he is healthy, and I think he actually wins by picking Duplessis on the feet. But that is three big what ifs, and I'm saying if that is the case, and I'm gonna assume that is the case, then I am picking Darren Till.
Yeah. I think this is a winnable fight for Dricus, especially if he goes grappling heavy, because I do think, based on what I've seen, that could be a big weakness of Darren Till's, even to this day. However, there's a lot of defensive frailties about Dricus, and you can sort of get away with that at times fighting guys who are unranked. When you start reaching the top levels, you're going to get found out. And there's only so many times you can sort of Bailey buddy your way through unanimous decisions. So I'm with you. I am going to pick Darren Till begrudgingly. I'm not 100% confident on this one, but I can see him getting a decision. I just think the defense of Dricus is just a bit too much of a concern for me.
I think another thing that's interesting to consider is, do you think it's an over or under 50% chance that Hamzat starts a fight in the crowd while he corners him?
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt this time.
He got in trouble last time, actually, so you got a point. His daddy dictator got real mad at him, apparently. So yeah, I think you got a point there.
I'm surprised we're not seeing more MMA journalists calling out the UFC's links to Kadyrov. I think it's very questionable.
I saw a picture of Cejudo, Usman, and Gaethje shooting guns with him, and I just turned off Twitter for the day.
Yeah, it's concerning stuff. But this isn't BBC Parliament. Hopefully, maybe it could be one day. So if you're hiring me, you know what? Contact me. We're going to be talking about our next fight on our card, and it's a welterweight veterans encounter. Robbie Lawler taking on Santiago Ponzinibbio. So the betting odds for this one, you can get Ponzinibbio, one of the biggest favourites on the entire card, minus 380, up against Robbie Lawler, who you can get a plus 310. Potentially, we've had a lot of retirements so far in 2022. A lot of people speculating this could be the last stand for the Ruthless one.
I think it is. I wanted it to happen earlier this year, at least earlier, or at the latest earlier this year, with the Brian Barberena fight. But I think this is one last go.
Yeah. And what do you think will Robbie Lawler's legacy be? Because I think there's a lot of fans, and we sort of said the same thing when it comes to Frankie Edgar. There's a lot of newer fans coming to the sport, seeing this old guy get knocked out countless times and thinking, really? He was the best fighter in the world at one point? I sort of feel like those same fans feel the same way about Robbie Lawler. They don't realise the sort of, firstly, how raw and how sort of hyped he was early in his run. You sort of touched on it when you did your retro review. We will give a plug for that later on in the show. And then he had the struggles. He was out the UFC for a long time and then came back with almost zero fanfare. And it just clawed and ground his way and ended up becoming champion and doing so with some of the best fights of all time.
Oh, yeah. He's got probably one of the best comeback stories of a career ever. You know, like from struggling to beat guys who never went on to do anything great in Strikeforce, with like your biggest win in years is Matt Lindland, who's in his 40s, to showing up, taking out quickly and effectively taking out then big contender Josh Koscheck, and then putting on incredible fight after incredible fight and incredible fight until he gets the belt, and then he has incredible defense after incredible defense after incredible defense. It's impressive.
I've got a list here of the notable names that Robbie Lawler's beaten in his career: Chris Lytle, Frank Trigg, Scott Smith, Melvin Manhoff. If you get the chance, watch that fight between him and Manhoff. It is incredible. Matt Lindland, Koscheck, Jake Ellenberger, Matt Brown, Johnny Hendricks, 2 wins over Rory McDonald, Carlos Condit, and then recently, of course, Nick Diaz.
Oh, yeah. Got his revenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think people enjoy talking about how Nick looked in that fight.
He looked bad. He looked really bad. I thought that fight was uncomfortable personally. Uh, Lawler looked pretty good, but Nick Diaz was like, punching like this. And then if it's true about all his injured discs in his back, that makes perfect sense. It's really hard to kind of put anything on punches if you're straining your back with a very serious back injury at the same time. I don't remember if that was confirmed or not that he did have those several discs injured, but I know that was a claim. But yeah, Nick didn't look great, and he was still giving Lawler some issues on the feet, and it just made me go, "Oh man, I guess both of you guys are leaving, right? I love all of you, God, but I guess it's time to go." And then Lawler came back for Barberina, and I had to get my heart broken again.
Do you know what that fight was for me? Diaz versus Lawler 2. You know how people give Bellator a ton of grief for putting doing Rampage versus Vanderlei 4? That was the UFC's version of that.
It really is when you think about it. It's to a T that, these guys shouldn't have, it was definitely the UFC's way of anything Bellator can do, we can do better, and then threw that on. And it was a 5-rounder too. It was very odd.
Yep. That being said, I know there's a lot of concerns about Robbie Lawler. I think this is going to be his last fight. It should be his last fight because I think when you get to the age he is, you're taking serious risks for your long-term health by continuing to fight. Thankfully for him, though, he is going to be fighting another veteran, Santiago Ponzinibbio, 28-6 record. A couple of notable names on his resume as well. Neil Magny, Mike Perry, Gunny Nelson, Zach Cummings, Court McGee, and a very young Sean Strickland as well, which I don't think a lot of people forget about, especially when Strickland was on the up as a middleweight. Now, at one point, Ponzinibbio had one of the longest winning streaks in the welterweight division. People were framing him as a dark horse, potentially fight for the belt. He then has some injury problems, and when he comes back, he's gone 1-3 since. Although that one victory was a win over Miguel Baeza, which is up there as one of the best fights of the year.
That fight is fantastic. I love Ponzinibbio. I'm a big Ponzinibbio fan. He's in my boy stable officially. Sadly, he wasn't allowed to be in it because he was, like you said, he was like a dark horse in the division. I thought he was a secret guy that could have given Tyron Woodley a lot of trouble back then. That's how long ago it was. And then all the injuries. He comes back. I'm super pumped. The leech knocks him out in a round. And it just hasn't been the same. He's been a little slower to his step. Definitely, potentially because of the injuries and all the time off. And he's still trying. It's a kind of that case of where you're an aging vet. You're aging. You're becoming this aging vet. And at the same time, you're still trying to kind of get back to form because you had so much time taken off your career. But he's definitely a boy of mine. I think he's a fantastically fun fighter to watch.
You can still have him in your boy stable, hey, if I've got Raquel Pennington in mine and she's number 4 as a bantamweight, you can very easily have Ponzi.
It's very true. Because I remember funny enough, it was the Ryan LaFleur fight that I think he made his debut on, that I went man, that guy was actually a lot of fun. I'm gonna keep watching him, and then it just turned into he's probably one of my my proto boys before I called him boy stable.
Let's talk about some of the technicalities when it comes to both fighters. So we'll start off with Ponzinibbio since we're sort of discussing him in a lot more detail. You sort of mentioned before with sort of veteran fighters and on the decline. I think that what a lot of aging fighters fail to do is they try fighting the same way they did in their prime, when they don't have the reflexes or the strength or the power that they may be used to, and they don't adapt. Part of the reason Glover was able to have the second wind in his career was because he switched from going from this big knockout artist to becoming a grappler. Ponzinibbio is still trying to fight the same way he did before the injury. And when you look at what a lot of what Ponzinibbio did very well, so good pressure fighter, but there wasn't that much variety to his striking. It was the same weapon, so it was like overhand right, left hook, and a few kicks down the middle. And if you have someone like you saw with Lorenz Larkin, who figured him out pretty comfortably and ended up finishing him, does Robbie have the street smarts to do that? Yes. Does he have the potency to do it? That's the big question. But I hope, for Ponzinibbio's sake, he is able to develop a bit more weapons to his arsenal.
He started bringing back the low kicks for a while, and I was really excited about that. It was his last fight, if I remember right, was I'm blanking on his name right now, and I love this guy.
Pereira.
Yes, Michel Pereira. Yeah. Oh God, that I was hoping he would kick the legs more in that fight, because him and Carmel Thunder were kicking each other's legs, and just it looked like they were both going to need walkers and for the rest of their life after what both their legs went through. So he's bringing. I would like to see him bring the low kicks back, because he used to throw them a little bit back before his injuries, but I thought it was something cool that he was re-adding to his game. I just wonder though, like you said, can Lawler capitalize on once he figures him out? Is he going to be able to like actually do something about it? I don't know.
And the big thing as well with bringing back the kicks, if you go back and you watch a lot of Robbie Lawler's career, he's always had issue with kickers. Like we mentioned the Manhoff fight beforehand. Yes, he ended up winning that fight. How much damage did Robbie Lawler take from Melvin Manhoff's kicks?
I remember he got kicked in the leg once, and his leg went off the ground so hard he could have kneed himself in the head. It was astonishing, and it was gross, like in a fun way. Because I don't know, maybe I like violence. It was getting kind of gross, and like his leg just flopping off. I thought it was going to disconnect at one point, and then of course he lands the big comeback shot. But I thought like Carlos Condon gave him trouble with his long, lanky kicks. And in the first fight with Hendricks was tearing up that lead leg. They're both southpaws, so it's a closed guard fight, and he was tearing him up with outside low kicks. So yeah, it's good analysis.
And the other big weakness as well with Robbie Lawler is pressure. Like Robbie works very well when he has the space to think and to set up his shots. But if you don't give him that space, he is vulnerable. And we saw that with Colby, who used a very sort of pressure wrestling heavy game. And I think Colby threw something like 600 strikes something in that fight. He was just on him all the time. And even more recently, I'd argue that's where he lost to Brian Barberena. Robbie Lawler started that fight very well. But Brian Barberena, a lot of pressure, just on the go all the time, and eventually he just wilted.
Oh yeah, he breaks people. Barberena does, just nonstop go 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 go. Lawler definitely wants to lead the dance. Whenever he's not leading the dance, he seems like he's always in trouble, or like he doesn't like being on his back foot. He wants to be the one on the front foot, and which is interesting because Ponzinibbio is very good at taking the front foot, almost to a fault.
So, which way are you going with this one then? You are the James Krause in this situation.
Well, Miss Sanko is, if that rumor's true. Anyways, I'm gonna go with Ponzinibbio here, and I think I'm gonna go with Ponzinibbio here because I think it's time for Lawler. I think it's sadly just time to call it. And I think he can give a lot to the next generation for sure. I have him in my top 5, maybe top 3 welterweights ever, personally. But I think he's lost way more of a step than Ponzinibbio has. I think Ponzinibbio still has the ability to be a top 12 to 15 ranked guy at welterweight, personally.
Because you've got to bear in mind as well, the people that Ponzinibbio has lost to, they're not bad fighters. The Leech, very capable. Jeff Neal, very capable. Pereira just broke into the top 15.
Oh yeah, those are three guys that are top 15, if not fringe top 10, right now, with potential to be even higher. And they're all looking great. They're all, like Jeff Neal just beat Vicente Luque. Like, you know, I mean, who I'm very high on Luque. So
And
like,
I,
it doesn't make his resume coming back that doesn't look awful because of that.
and I think I'm right in saying as well that the Neal Ponzi fight was pretty close as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was like one round apiece going into the third, if I remember correctly. I remember it being. I remember scoring it for Neal. Um, but I saw people go, "Oh, Ponzi could have taken that," and I'm like, "Oh, maybe." It was pretty back and forth.
Yeah, I'm picking Ponzinibbio to win this one as well. I'm going to say a second round stoppage, and I think Robbie Lawler will hang it up. And I suspect that because you look at some of the fights on this card, you look at some of the fights on the prelims, there's some very good fights which were all worthy of being on the main card. I think Robbie Lawler has maybe told them, hey, I'm going to call it a day after this. So the idea of him saying his goodbyes, full attendance, putting down the gloves in the middle of the octagon on a pay-per-view main card, it reminds me of when they put Cowboy versus Jim Miller.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I think Robbie's going to call
It's
it a day.
I think it's gonna be a sad day. Robbie Lawler is like, he feels like, to me. I always kind of refer to him as the MF Doom of MMA. MF Doom people used to say that he was your favorite rapper's favorite rapper. Robbie Lawler feels like your favorite fighter's favorite fighter to me. I feel like every fighter ever names him as like at least in their top five, if not top three ever.
So many retirements this year. It just shows the sport's changing a lot. Like, think about how many big names we've had this year. We've had Cowboy, Joanna, Jose Aldo, Melvin Manhoff retired as well. We've had so many
Mm-hmm.
big legends of the sport all call it a day. The sport's
Frankie,
changing. Frankie, yeah.
yeah, it's like the last remnants of my like my high school to early college like addiction and burgeoning obsession with the sport has it's just all kind of fading away.
The
Guys.
STEM era.
Yeah. I mean, like I said it in the retro review. Like I think it's time we have to hang up the frosted tips and the baggy jeans with holes in them. Let's retire. Stim has to go next. You're right. Face the Pain has to be retired now.
Never liked that song, to be honest.
It's terrible. It's endearing to me though. Like it's like I hate this song, but all right, it's been around for so long.
Yeah, it's like
It's
a
kind
Christmas
of,
song. You know they're naff.
yeah,
You know it's a bit rubbish, but it's just part of the tradition.
it's the equivalent of the Mariah Carey song we have to hear 1,000 times a year
Yeah.
in Christmas. Oh yeah.
A song that we'll probably be hearing when it comes to UFC 282 will be happening on the core-main event, and that will be Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes, because they'll be cheering on Paddy Pimblett as he makes his American debut up against Jared Gordon. Now, Pimblett is a minus 190 favourite for this one. You can get Jared Gordon in at plus 160. So as mentioned before, big British star finally making his debut overseas. Will this be Prince Nassim Hamed against Kevin Kelly or Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz?
It's a very good reference. I do like me some Prince Nassim. Or I uh I don't know actually on this one. I feel like this is another safe matchmaking, but I also think there's a potential upset. I was really wrong last time. I said I thought Leave It could do it. Uh but I rewatched the Jared Gordon Leonardo Santos fight, so I think there's somewhere in the middle potentially. Uh, I think this one's actually a really awkward one to call.
Yeah. I'm leaning more towards Paddy than I am towards Jared Gordon. I will be picking Paddy to win this one. I'll obviously give some of the reasons why. One of the big criticisms that people have had in regards to Paddy Pimblett, and you sort of brought this up when you covered Connor on, I think it was the 189 retro review. You brought up, hey, Connor always ducks all these wrestlers. He's not confident that he can handle himself on the ground. We're seeing a similar situation the opposite way when it comes to Paddy, whereby they're not putting him up against strikers because they fear some guy's going to exploit his defense and take his head off. And if you look at the people he's beaten in the UFC so far, Rodrigo Vargas, Jordan Levitt, Luigi Vendramini, all guys predominantly with grappling-based backgrounds.
Mm. And none of them with that one-shot power.
No.
You know, like, so it's definite. They're definitely giving him very favorable matchmaking, and which, because he's talking. He's talking a lot. He's constantly spouting off something, constantly, talking about how he's the greatest ever, like, already, or like, stuff like that, just hyping himself up, which is good self-promotion, but at the same time, it's kind of awkward whenever, you're obviously being protected in matchmaking, I think.
Yeah. I will say, when it comes to Paddy Pimblett, obviously you mentioned that a big part of the reason why this fight is the co-main is because of the job that Paddy has done to try and promote himself. He has a massive fan base, both in the UK, and it's starting to spread worldwide. And that was even there when he was fighting in Cage Warriors. Like, I knew people who would never watch a Cage Warriors show in their life, but they did so to see Paddy. And yes, he is talking a big fight, but I think the big difference and the reason why he's resonating with people in the way that others may not do, he is charming with it. You might not like what he says, but he does come across. He's got a charisma about him. And that's something that not a lot of other sort of big trash talkers have.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm not a Paddy guy. I'm not a fan. I'm not going to be rooting for him probably anytime soon. But he's one of those guys that I feel like if I met in like real life,
yes,
I would be like, no, this guy's great. What? Like, I feel like I would be embarrassed at how much of a Paddy hater I am if I actually met the guy, because he does seem like, when he's not, he's very confident when he isn't talking like that. He seems like a down to earth, very relaxed, very chill, charismatic guy. And obviously his post fight speech a while ago, where he was talking about how some social issues. It kind of won me over a little bit. I was like, that's a great message to have, I think.
He reminds me a little bit of Ricky Hatton.
Yeah. Oh, I like Ricky Hatton. Yeah, I was a Ricky Hatton guy. Yeah, that's a pretty good comparison. It's definitely. Now I have the Ricky Hatton Pacquiao build up in my head.
No.
I know.
That fight didn't go well.
It went well for me because I called it. I think that was like one of the first like early times where I was like, I'm gonna pick this, but and I liked both. It was another one of those cases where you like both guys, but yeah, I mean, he's a big trash talker or something. I'm not really a personal fan of, but you're right. He's got this charisma. He knows what to say, how to say it. And whenever he's talking of a big game, but then when he's just talking like a normal person, he comes across very genuine. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Let's talk a little bit about his opponent, though. Jared Gordon, 19-5 record. Some notable wins overall in his career. Leonardo Santos, Joe Selecki, Chris Fishgold. So he has fought one of Paddy's teammates before, so that might be something to bear in mind. Hakran Diaz, and also Bill Algeo. He beat him on the regional scene. I do want to ask this question, though. What is your favourite Jared Gordon fight?
I like probably the Santos fight, because I watched it just recently. I feel like I'm cheating. But I remembered, I actually like the pressure he kind of put on a little bit in that fight. I remember rooting for Santos, but because I like Santos, but I thought he kind of did a decent job of like having a sloppy but very pressure heavy kickboxing match with Santos, because he knew not to go to the ground with him.
Yeah. I was interested in the Santos fight as well, because Santos, of course, is well known as being a fantastic jiu-jitsu practitioner. And of course, Paddy likes to utilize his grappling a lot, likes to try and get into these sort of scrambling exchanges. And I was fascinated to see how Jared Gordon neutralized that offense of Santos. And he was able to do so very well. I think his body work especially, very, very good. And I think that could be something which Paddy needs to look out for. That being said, though,
especially a guy who eats that, balloons up to that size and has to cut all that weight to come down.
Yes,
body
definitely.
work for sure.
That being said, though, the big thing that stood out about Jared Gordon, though, he's never been a finisher. He's not a power puncher. Even though his striking, I felt, was pretty solid when he fought Santos, he doesn't have that sort of big knockout shot, which could arguably give Paddy a lot of problems. Because I don't think Paddy's striking defense is all that great. Venturini caused him a lot of problems very early on in his debut. I think the thing with Paddy is, I think it's almost like we know the ride is going to end at some point, but we're going to enjoy it as long as we can. I know if you put that guy against anyone, any sort of competent striker in the top 10, he's going to get found out. But against someone like Jared Gordon, it's a winnable fight for Paddy, especially if he can get to the ground, and he is capable of doing that.
Oh yeah, there's a reason they never, there was a reason they never set up the Topuria fight. Both those guys were barking at each other, and they both wanted it, or at least they both claimed they wanted it. The UFC was never going to do that. They're going to enjoy the ride while they have it. Topuria, I think, is the worst matchup Paddy could ask for. The guy who's going to stop all his takedowns and land big power punches and combinations. It's not. They don't want to see that. Gordon, even though, like you said, his striking was, I thought, impressive and very capable striker, it doesn't feel like this is a dangerous fight for Paddy because the power isn't there, for sure. That's why I still feel like this is a potentially super safe matchmaking again.
We talked a little bit about some of Paddy's weaknesses when it comes to the striking. What is he doing right on the ground? What makes him so dangerous once he gets the fight to the mat?
He's really crafty. If he gets put on his back, he's a very firm believer of the 3 S's: stand up, submit him, or sweep. And he's very aggressive with his sweeps. I know like the joke is, with Conor, no ground game and all that, which I kind of agree with, at least on some level. It's funny because like Paddy's like the exact opposite. Paddy reminds me more of Conor's teammate Gunny Nelson. Not the same caliber of grappler, but very, kind of similar in that stance where it's like, oh, Paddy can strike. That's where his big weakness is, though. But on the ground, he's like a maestro down there. Very crafty, very sneaky. I think Vargas, if I remember correctly, was on top of him, and he quickly just reversed it and, took it over. And with Leave It, he was stuffing the takedowns and reversing the takedowns. Very, very, very sneaky. One grappling exchange with him, even if you get in a dominant position, like a half guard or guard, he's very likely to, sweep you, and then now you're on your back and panicking.
Yeah, and I have to say as well, like, I have more time for Jordan Levitt than some other people do. I do hold his wrestling in very high regard. And I'll say that Paddy managing to beat him in Levitt's domain is something I did think, you know what, hold my hands up, that was very impressive.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I was a big monkey. I was pretty high on the Monkey King, and then as like his nickname is, and then he took care of him pretty easily. Made me look real dumb for picking Levitt.
That being said, though, the idea of Levitt, a sort of stunned, silent O2 Arena, as Levitt starts twerking in the middle of the octagon, that would have been an amazing sight.
Oh my! I would have just him and his coaches doing the Dirty Dancing routine. Like, could you just imagine? Like Paddy tapped. Like Paddy didn't tap. He went out. He refused to tap. And then they're like Dirty Dancing as the crowd is going ballistic, and just like, I think that would have been, I probably would have put that as my moment of the year. Just the sheer out of context hilarity that is.
So bookmakers are favouring Paddy. The people online are favouring Paddy. Are you favouring Paddy?
Yeah. I don't want to look stupid again. Uh, no, in all in all seriousness, I think this fight's actually really close. Uh, I'm a man of, I have a strong resolve. I have on my notes here. I even said, hopefully Karl doesn't make you pick. But no, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and pick. I lean very slightly towards Paddy. If I pick this fight 100 times, I'm probably picking Paddy 52 times. But for that 48, I kind of think Jared can just avoid the grappling. Something tells me that he can just negate that aspect, and maybe he's able to put that pressure on and wear out with body work and wear out Paddy, who uh, all joking aside, he does have I'm saying this as a guy who's very paunchy and heavy currently, for a guy who's 5'6", but Paddy does have an eating issue after fights where he balloons up and then cuts all that weight that isn't healthy, and the body work of Jared Gordon could do him some wonders here.
Especially when we've seen in the past that he does look very tired later on in the fight. That's how he lost to Southern Bark.
Oh yeah, it was in Cage Warriors he lost that. I remember seeing that. Like, was that his last loss, right?
Yes, it was, I think. Yeah, Cameron Else was his first one, and then there was another one just before that, and then the Southern Bark fight.
Yeah, because I remember hearing that, like, I remember seeing it. He ended up gassing out against him, but I mean, I like I said though, I'm leaning towards Paddy. Like 52 out of 100 times, I'm picking Paddy for sure here.
Main event time, and we're going up to the light heavyweight division. So it is Jan Blachowicz, the number 2 seed, who will be taking on the number 3 seed, Magomed Ankalaev. Now, this fight was supposed to be part of UFC 282. It was going to be a 3-round fight between the two, potentially to decide the next title challenger to the winner of Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prochazka. We got the news a few weeks ago. Yuri Prochazka did some damage to his shoulder. He chose to vacate the belt rather than the UFC create an interim. Glover Teixeira was offered the opportunity to face Magomed Ankalaev in the main event, but Glover, with the speculation being that the title fight was going to be his last, decided, I want more time to prepare for whoever the winner is, and then I will obviously come back to questions. So, Blachowicz versus Ankalaev becomes a 5-round fight for the vacant title. So, a lot to dissect there. So, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Number 1, did Yuri make the right call by vacating the belt rather than the UFC creating an interim? And 2, has Glover done the right thing by turning down the Ankalaev fight?
Yes, on the first one, I'm a very firm believer, despite it being kind of a meme thanks to, I think it was Nick saying it. I'm a very big believer of defender vacate. If you're injured and you can't, defend your title, or you refuse to, let's not waste time in a division. Conor McGregor ruined the lightweight division for about a year and a half because he was busy fighting Floyd Mayweather. We didn't have a champion for a while. We had interim champions, which was weird. Didn't really work, I thought. So I'm a very firm believer of, and I think it's very admirable that he recognized the severity of his shoulder and goes, I'm not doing this to this division. This isn't fair. I'm going to just vacate it. I think that is a very admirable quality of Jiri. The Glover thing, I think he did make the right call. I think on some level, you have to realize you're fighting for yourself. You're not fighting for fighting for you, not the UFC. I know the UFC would have wanted them to do him and Ankalaev here, but if that isn't fair, if he doesn't feel comfortable fighting that, he shouldn't have to fight it. They sign his checks and all that, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of critique about he's an aging veteran that could call it a career any day now, sadly. We don't know how their care is post-retirement, and so you kind of on some level have to look out for yourself. And so that's another decision by Glover that I very much respect.
So it's put us into this fascinating situation where I think a lot of people didn't think that Jan Blachowicz would get another opportunity to fight for the belt, yet here he is, one fight away from regaining a belt, which obviously the pandemic was a difficult time for a lot of people. And especially in the world of mixed martial arts, obviously we couldn't do any fights in front of crowds. We had the whole Fight Island thing. Most of the events were taking place in the Apex. If there was one feel-good story that came out of that either, though, it was Jan Blachowicz going from light heavyweight journeyman, who lost to Patrick Cummins, I think at UFC 210, I think, and then going on and becoming the baddest 205 on the planet.
It was awesome. Like every time he won, like immediately after, I'm like, wow, I can't believe he won that. Like every time, and then I realized, like, oh, I said that all the way until he became champion. You know, what a feel good story, and what a great. At least I don't know him personally. I don't know his whole history, but he seems like one of the great good guys of the sport. You know, it was very hard to decide who to root against when it was him and Glover Teixeira fighting last year. So, because both are great guys. Yeah, I'm a Jan fan, honestly, now. Like, ever since, like, whenever he had started his run as champion, I was like, I know I'm going to look like a bandwagoner, but I think he's finally won me over. And, yeah, I love the guy now.
And I will say as well, like, we obviously make predictions on this show. We have done ever since we started this. I think one of the most proud predictions that I made was picking Jan Blachowicz to beat Dominic Reyes, second round KO.
Yeah, I remember you told me about that one. I was like, that is a wild one. I never would have got that.
Yeah.
Crazy one to land.
And some people like to frame the Jan Blachowicz turnaround to sort of being in the right place at the right time. Like John Jones had vacated the belt. But you look at the people that this guy has beaten throughout his light heavyweight run. There are some top names here. So I'll go through them. Alexander Rakic, of course, that was a doctor stoppage, but he still managed to get the W next to his name. Israel Adesanya.
He was winning too.
Yep. Corey Anderson, Dominic Reyes, Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold, which is one of the most brutal knockouts of all time. Nikita Krylov, who's on a fantastic run right now. Jimmy Manuwa, Jared Cannonier, Ilya Latifi, and if we go back to KSW, even beat the infamous Sokaju.
It's 11 names on that. On a pretty darn good resume, honestly.
Definitely. What, in your opinion, was the big key in Jan Blachowicz's transformation? What turned him from this sort of middle-of-the-road light heavyweight to the guy that a lot of people hold in high regard now?
Right here. I think he... I'm not going to question his mentality with fighting before, like whenever he was fighting his like earlier Latifis and stuff like that. I'm not questioning that. I just think that, he talked about this really traumatic experience he had and why he wears the wristband. I'm not going to get into it. I don't want to do the story an injustice, but check it out if anyone hasn't, of why he wears the wristband. I think something in that kind of made him, something click in his mind of how he should approach the fight game and everything. And I think that's when he actually started his big run, was immediately after that had happened. And I think something mentally clicked with him there. I think it's super unfair to say right place, right time. Like we're talking about Jan Blachowicz. We're not talking about Dave Manet, at middleweight years and years ago. I think it was definitely a meritocracy, and he was the guy. It wasn't a right. If John Jones would have showed up, he would have taken him out too. That's my opinion. And I think something just clicked mentally for him, and it was just go, 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 go. And I think something must have happened last year, because the Glover that fought, if anyone doesn't know, the Glover that fought Jan, the Jan that fought Glover, I should say, looked like a completely different guy.
Yeah, that was not a good performance.
Title reign. It was shocking, to say the least.
I think the big things that stood out for me when it comes to Jan is I think his defense is incredibly tight. He's not so much one of those fighters who beats you with his own strengths. What he does is he takes away his opponents. And I think the fight that really identified that for me was Israel Adesanya. Like, Izzy uses a very kick-heavy game, tried to attack the lower legs, and Jan took that away from him. And once Izzy became a lot more immobile, then he was able to utilize the wrestling, and that's how he managed to get himself the win. So he's very good at taking away other fighters' weapons. We even saw that to an extent where he fought Alexander Rakic. And I'm particularly fascinated by that because if there's one thing that stands out about Ankalaev, he has a very kick-heavy game too. So are we going to see Blachowicz doing the same thing he did to Izzy and taking away those kicks?
It's a very interesting like from another kick-heavy opponent as well, like you said. And I think I really like how you brought that up. You know, there's a term in like a lot of competitive games and like in some competitive sports really, but mostly like in like certain games where it's sometimes you have to think not about how you win, but how to stop your opponent from winning. And I think Jan is probably the best example of that in MMA and how he takes away weapons actively. I mean, I think this is actually a really good matchup. I was actually really excited for this fight as a co-main event. So it should translate to me being excited for it as a main event, I guess. But I think this is a really, really interesting matchup on paper.
So let's talk about Ankalaev then. Now, 17-1 record, the latest of the Dagestani invasion coming into the UFC. A lot of notable wins on this record and his rise up the rankings. So we had Anthony Smith in his most recent performance, Thiago Santos, Volkan Oezdemir, Nikita Krylov, 2 wins over Ion Cutelaba, one of them being that sort of bizarre non-stoppage where Cutelaba was feigning and being rocked and ended up being stopped as a result of it. I think the thing that people most think of when it comes to Ankalaev, though, it's not the people who he's beaten, it's the loss. That last-minute Hail Mary submission to Paul Craig. So I'm going to put this to you. What is the sort of bigger sort of asterisks that people bring up? Ankalaev versus Craig or Stipe versus Struve?
I think Stipe versus Struve is probably a bigger asterisk because he got eye poked.
Still bring that up to Stipe.
Yeah, he got eye poked really bad. If we're gonna be honest, outside of the Ngannou fight, I think that in the first DC fight, the only reason he got knocked out is because he got poked in the eyes, like really bad. At one point, there's a clip in the DC fight where he just like flicks his finger directly into his eye. He learned from John Jones. I mean, he learned from the best, I suppose. Picked up, you pick things up in losses, But yeah, I think the Ankalaev one with Paul Craig. Paul Craig caught him. That's a Paul Craig win. I don't think there's an asterisk there. I think he got him. The fight isn't over until the final bell rings, and he got caught. It happens.
So let's talk about some of the strengths that Ankalaev has, though. I think what's very interesting to me is compared to other sort of Dagestani fighters, which primarily rely on their wrestling, we've got a guy who is very prominent when it comes to the striking game. Very kick-heavy approach. Mainly likes to throw stuff to the body, but he can go high. We saw that when he fought Prachnio. And if fights do start to get a little bit wayward, he does maybe start to get a little bit panicked, then he can fall back on the grappling, as he has done in his past couple of wins, where he's become less striking orientated and seems more content to sort of take a guy down and just grind them out for the decision.
Yeah, he went from being like this like really cool, Dagestani striker with a lot of power and definitely very quick with a lot of fun techniques, and to just like kind of a grinder out of wins. It's almost like I think we called it in our last preview when we had to talk about him for the Anthony Smith fight. I think we brought up his that he's almost afraid to lose now.
Yes,
in a sense. Yeah, it's definitely very noticeable. I thought he didn't look bad. I thought he actually looked really well against the Anthony Smith fight. I thought he was cleaning him up, but and it was an injury that got the win that caused the win. But he was, like I said, like with Jan, he was beating Rakic beforehand, and he was beating Anthony Smith beforehand. But yeah, the Thiago Santos performance was very
pedestrian.
The big snooze fest. Yeah, pedestrian's nicer. Yeah, it wasn't like the most entertaining and electric performance. you know, and that's kind of a fear I have with this in terms of quality of fight.
Yeah, because if there was one big sort of weakness I've seen with Jan Blachowicz, I think actually Jan is a very underrated grappler. We saw him when he fought Nikita Krylov. Like, Krylov's a pretty good on the ground himself, and Jan was able to
Yeah.
neutralize him and end up getting the sub. But I did see a lot of weaknesses with Jan when it came to him being taken down. And yes, I don't think he was himself when he fought Glover, but it was concerning the discrepancy on the ground between the two. And I think
That's how Patrick
Ankalaev
Cummings
is
beat
going
him
to
back
try
in the
and
day.
neutralize that.
Well, and that's how Patrick Cummings beat him back in the day.
Yeah.
I just not randomly thought of that. Like, yeah, like Patrick Cummings took him down and was aggressive in the wrestling. Gets it. Jan is very, very strong and very good at stopping the takedown. But if you do get him down, it seems like that's where his big weakness is. And that has to, like, I'm with you there. That has to be the Ankalaev path to victory, I'd imagine.
Like, I just don't picture Jan Blachowicz like throwing up his legs for a triangle or like trying to sort of like push his opponent away to get back to his feet. I just don't think he's that kind of sort of, even physically, you could see just a lot of upper body strength. I just don't think he has it in him to sort of get himself out of those positions.
You don't see him diving in Ryan Hall style, trying to get that leg lock like you did on BJ Penn.
I'd love to see him try.
I would love to watch it. I would. That'd be my moment of the year in MMA.
I always love it on like those, just off on a tangent. I always love it on those sort of like UFC, on like UFC 4, for example, when they give fighters moves which they never use in real life.
I never understand that. It's like I love the Neal Dariush story. My boy Benny, when I think it was Scott Holtzman, he knocked out with a spinning back fist. The only reason he threw it is because his friend's son was like, "Yeah, you have a really good spinning back fist in the game. You should throw it." And he goes, "I've never thrown one in a fight before. Like, why do I have this in the game?" Sure.
Like, what's the point of giving Karl a high kick, a spinning back kick?
I don't know. I saw a weird one the other day. I forgot who they gave it to. I think I saw someone must have done it somehow. I think it was Paddy. Someone gave him a tornado kick like Shogun used to throw in Pride, and I was like, "What is this?" Like, I remember back in like UFC 2 getting upset that like, like what's up with them giving Connor like a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and superstar wrestling, like playing career mode as Connor's double legging me. It was so weird. The video games are weird when you really think about it.
What would you say are Ankalaev's biggest strengths?
His most appealing strengths, I mean, his biggest strength is obviously, I think his grappling and striking are very close. Like, I think he's a very good technical striker. Even with his slower pace of lately, I can't act like I'm not impressed by the fact that he is able to just kind of take over the striking, through counters and distance management. And so I feel like they're about equal.
Hard to hit.
But I would probably give yeah, he's really hard to hit. Normally with these, like, it's a stereotype, but normally with these like counter strikers, it's like, oh, they're really hard to hit, but if you touch them once, they're going out. If I remember right, Thiago Santos clobbered him with like one of the few shots he landed, and he went, "Oh, that kind of sucked." It was just like kind of relatively. He was a little hurt, obviously, like we would all be, but he recovered very well. So we have seen his chin tested, at least. Whenever he was, that finishing knockout guy, I was always impressed by how active of a kicker he was at 205. When you start getting at higher weight classes, you start seeing a lot less less kicking guys. That's what makes Cyril Gahn so impressive, and Krokop back in the day so impressive. Well, at the heavyweight level, being such active kickers. But I thought Ankalaev was a really like active one for sure. And obviously he's a southpaw, so we will see the open guard matchup here between these two. I mean, Jan will switch back and forth, but actually, just thought about something. Jan does very well against southpaws historically. Huh.
it's going to be really fascinating to see. And I'm also interested as well, like Jan Blachowicz is 39 years old, so by the time catches up to everyone, Jan Blachowicz is sort of starved it off for now. Is this maybe the fight where Jan finally looks old?
I hope not. But it could happen, you know. The Rocky quote, "Father Time's unbeaten," you know. And then there's that, you know, the wheels of time are cruel, you know, quote from that Corey Graves stole from Ocarina of Time. But um, you know, time's unbeaten, and he could look slow. He could look older. Um, Crazy to think that like he's got as much mileage, you know, out of the game. You know, like if we talked about it, like you know, what a career comeback he had as well. But you know, he hasn't looked too slow. He looked slow last year in the Glover Teixeira fight, but there had to have been an injury or something going on into that fight. That was just so uncharacteristic because in the Rakic fight, I thought he looked great. I thought he
Yes.
looked really good in the Rakic fight.
Yep. So, final prediction of the year, final prediction of 2022. Which way are you going for this one?
I'm going Jan. I have this feeling here, and I try always being very technical and leave like emotions and everything out of this, but I have this kind of vibe and feeling that the power of Jan is going to be something different. Like, look at the side of Dominic Reyes whenever he was taking the lead left kicks to the body. I think I think that played a big factor into the finish of that fight. Once he felt the power, he was like, okay, I got to be a little more careful, and he kind of got frozen. It kind of got stuck frozen there. And Dominic Reyes is a similar kind of counter striker at that time to an Ankalaev. So if Ankalaev does want to play this out in the feet with distance control and counters, I think Jan could definitely get this upset. And I do think he's almost. I definitely think he's the stronger physically guy to potentially overpower and defend himself against the grappling of Ankalaev. But if he gets put on his back, it's probably a long night for him.
And that's the way I
So we'll
think it's
see.
going to go. I am picking Ankalaev to win this one. I think it's going to be a very wrestling heavy fight. I'm going to say 49-46. I think Jan could win one of the early rounds, but I think Ankalaev is going to, if he starts feeling the power of Jan, he's going to go straight in for the takedown. And if he does, I think Ankalaev's going to be very content to just sit in the guard and grind out for the decision. I don't think it's going to be, I hope I'm proven wrong, but I don't think it's going to be all that exciting a fight.
I think this fight has the first thing I put on my notes is I think this fight. I don't think there's going to be much of an in between. I think this fight is going to be a secret classic in the light heavyweight division potentially. I think this fight could be very, very good, or it could be awful. And I don't think there's any in between there.
Yeah.
Sadly.
I have to say that's in terms of what my head is thinking. In terms of my heart, I am rooting for Jan to win this one. I'm in the same boat as you. I think that Jan comes across like a really great dude, and I think his redemption storyline has been fantastic to follow. But also as well, I think part of the reason why light heavyweight has been so good recently is because it's been so unpredictable. Because you've been, now that sort of the lid is off the tub, as it were, John Jones is gone, and now the crabs are able to roam the floor, as it were. I mean, anyone in that sort of like top 6 to top 10 can beat anyone in this weight class. I think it's been fantastic for that reason. And of course, we had Glover versus Yuri, which was one of the best fights of the year. In my opinion, the best fight of the year. I would hate to see all that momentum and all that potential come to an end if Ankalaev gets the belt. Because I think if Ankalaev does win, I can see him holding that for a long time. And I think when you've seen, like obviously Makhachev's got the belt, very similar sort of fighter. You see a lot of the other Dagestani guys coming to the fore in places like Bellator, the PFL, etc. I would hate to have an MMA where every champion is from the same area, fights the same sort of wrestling heavy style, and isn't really the most exciting personality behind the scenes. Like, it's like anything. It's like, if you have the world's nicest pizza for your dinner, that's great. But imagine having that pizza for every meal of every day for the next 3 months. You just need a little bit of variety, and I think Ankalaev winning the belt, it's not a good omen, but that's my own personal opinion.
I think I understand a lot of that. I think it just kind of goes with phases in MMA.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of phases. Like there was was it like years ago they talked about the European invasion, how every champion was going to be a European guy, and we got a couple. We had like Connor was champ, then Bisping and stuff like that. And like now we had the Polish invasion, with like Joanna and then Jan. So like I think it just kind of goes through phases. I think eventually, I'm not going to comment on Makhachev because I'm still processing how he won against Charles Oliveira. It's a very stunning fight for me.
And I mean, like, there was once upon a time.
These guys seem beatable.
Yeah, I mean, there was once upon a time when like all the top champions were from Miletic, and then all the Brazilians around sort of Anderson's time.
It's like Machida, Anderson, like Vitor. The guys, and then here comes Shogun. You have Vitor, TRT Tour, that creation in the lab. I mean, that was the weirdest phase. There was no country. It was just the genetics department for the Liver King, where everybody was just super juiced, and Vitor Belfort was yelling about Jesus while kicking an eye out of Bisping's head. It was a terrifying experience.
I don't understand how the Liver King became such a big like pop culture thing. It's like, can you remember that really bad self-defense coach? And he was like the big flavor of the month. And now it's Liver King. And like a couple of years ago it was the Island Boys. Like where does the MMA community get these guys from?
I feel like we're just like a weird place for like the most random weirdos, and we're just kind of like the catch-all for it. Like the Dale Brown bad self-defense coach. He might be in Joaquin Buckley's corner at this event. That's a real thing because he was in one of his corners for a fight or so ago.
And I think Buckley won that fight as well.
Yeah, which was really impressive. But it's because the guy didn't bring a gun to the fight like he should have. Yeah, like I only knew who the Liver King was because I saw him like cage side for an MMA event, and I was like, that dude's on some crazy steroids, and me and my roommate laughed about it. And then I didn't hear anything about him. I didn't know anything about him. And then it's like, did you guys hear the Liver King's on steroids? I'm like, how is that surprising? That guy looks like if you painted him green, he'd be the Hulk. Like that dude looks unnatural. That was a monster. So we just have the weirdest non-MMA personalities in our MMA circle.
We have been on a couple of tangents, I have to say, so I do apologize for that one, but we have finally got to the end of the UFC 282 preview show. It's been an absolute pleasure, Joe, once again for you to join us here. Before we leave, however, you are going to be back on the main channel. We've got another retro review coming up. I know these don't get many views, but we thoroughly enjoy making them. We think it's something different for the channel, and we appreciate the amount of people who come out all the time and support this sort of like side project. Now, light heavyweight title's going to be on the line. We thought we'd celebrate the career of one of light heavyweight's all-time greats. So, this week's retro review will be a classic Chuck Liddell card. We put this to the public to see which one you wanted to see. We gave you 4 choices. Joe, which fight and which event are you covering this week?
It's UFC 47. It's on back when we had the weird little subtitles for events, and it's the first ever Chuck Liddell Tito Ortiz fight.
I think a very wise choice. I know it was very close between that and UFC 79, which was the Wanderlei Silva fight. It was very
it was very razor thin, if I remember right, you said.
Yeah. I think the closest one we've done so far. And as well as that, though, if you go to the main channel, we've opened the poll up for the January card, which we're going to be doing. So, UFC 283 is going to be taking place in Rio. Who better to talk about than the King of Rio? So we have 4 classic Jose Aldo events for you to choose between. So we have WEC 47. Aldo first wins the featherweight title. He beats Mike Brown in the WEC. His first title defense in WEC, which came at 48, where he beat the legs off Uriah Faber. It's also WEC's only pay-per-view event, and I think did pretty good numbers as well. UFC 142. Aldo finally fights in Brazil for the first time in 10 years, taking on an unbeaten guy by the name of Chad Mendes. We also have the Edson Barboza Terry Etim knockout, Rumble Johnson, and the infamous weight miss. I think Mario Yamasaki may have caused a little bit of controversy on that card as well.
Oh, yeah, with some guy named Eric Silva.
Yeah, that strapping youngster.
Oh, yeah.
And our final choice, UFC 179, once again in Rio, and once again a rematch between Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes, considered by many to be the best featherweight title fight in UFC history. So 4 great choices there.
Oh, yeah. I always have like what I personally would want to call, but man, there's a legitimate reason for me to vote for each and every one. I made my vote already, and I won't say what I voted for it. I don't want to influence anyone's minds, but that's a really close one. It's a really hard one for me to pick between.
So that's coming up in January. What may also come up in January, I'm going to put this to Joe, is we've got ourselves our first Patreon request. So somebody has given us the $10 donation and said, I really want you to cover this one. So there's a good chance the first video of 2023 on the main channel will be that Patreon request.
I have an update on that, actually. The script is done. I just have to shoot it. I wrote the script Wednesday, like randomly during the day. I watched the whole card and I was like, okay, well, KO'd it. So I just have to shoot it whenever I get a chance to be free.
And on that bombshell, a great way to end the show. Joe, thank you very much for joining us. My name has been Karl Bainbridge. This has been the INC. Thank you very, very much for watching.